The Diamondbacks are entering what should be a pivotal 2026 season for General Manager Mike Hazen in his 10th year running the Diamondbacks baseball operation. We'll talk about why it is such a pivotal season. We'll talk about the likelihood Ketel Marte stays, breakout candidates for the Diamondbacks, who they need to break out in order to be competitive, and we'll talk about their remaining needs on this episode of the dbacks Under Review podcast. And hello everyone. Hope you enjoyed your Christmas and New Year's. We're into 2026. We got a big season coming up for the Arizona Diamondbacks. Hazen in his 10th year, the Diamondbacks are coming off back-to-back playoff misses, and much of their pitching is injured going into the season. The Diamondbacks will be missing quite a few players going into the season. Justin Martinez, AJ Puck, and Corbin Burns highlight the list of injured players, and unfortunately, because a lot of them are their high-priced players, you got Burns and Gurriel on the IL. The Diamondbacks have more than $50 million of their 2026 payroll set to hit the injured list at the start of the year and unlikely to pitch before the All-Star break. So that means Mike Hazen is building this roster on essentially legendary difficulty. And you look at that legendary difficulty, if anyone's ever played Halo, of course some people probably can beat Halo in legendary. That I've found it to be pretty difficult myself, but when we look at the 2026 season, the Diamondbacks have made 3 free agent moves. They brought back James McCann, they brought back Merrill Kelly, and then they added Michael Soroka on a 1-year deal. So that's pretty much the Diamondbacks offseason in a nutshell at this point. They've otherwise been held up by Ketel Marte trade rumors. They're trying to get a young controllable starter, and either a reliever or top prospects, based on the reporting on what the Diamondbacks asked for Marte. And of course, as of the new year, the Diamondbacks haven't come close to a deal regarding Marte. They're looking for a superstar-like return on top of the with the controllable starter as the headliner in that deal. And because of that, they've been, I guess you can say, sitting on their hands for waiting for something to happen to that trade. Depending on what they get that trade, that kind of changes the direction of what they do this offseason. As I mentioned in a previous episode, a Ketel Marte trade the Diamondbacks would accept would be something that satisfies all their offseason needs in one fell swoop. Of course, as we know, the reporting on Marte the last 2 weeks has been if the Diamondbacks don't get offers from other clubs on Marte, they will shut it down soon. It was implied to be the new year from what Steve Gilbert wrote for MLB.com. But they're at a point this offseason where they can't afford to wait and they've got to move. They got to shore up some stuff because they can't let the Marte situation, the Marte circus, I call it a circus, they can't let that run their offseason. Because if it does, Diamondbacks will not be in a position to compete in 2026. There's certainly going to have to be something where the team and Marte have to talk things out after this is over with. And if they don't get their, if they aren't able to shore up their bullpen, it could be a pretty long 2026 season, and Hazen and Lovullo will certainly be on the hot seat. Lovullo is in his final year of his contract, and if the Diamondbacks aren't necessarily close to competitive, whereas situations where they have a full, healthy year of Corbin Burns and Justin Martinez anchoring the rotation, the bullpen, they may decide to let Torey Lovullo walk after the season. They're not going to fire him because his contract is up at the end of the year. I don't see a situation where they fire him early, necessarily, unless it's a clear and obvious situation where he has completely lost the locker room by the end of June, which doesn't seem like a possibility because something like that really hasn't happened in his 9 years running the club on the field. But if the Diamondbacks are in a situation where they continue to fall backwards in wins, they went from 89 wins in 2024 to 80 in 2025, although functionally went from missing the playoffs by a tiebreaker to missing it by 4 games. The Diamondbacks continue to fall backwards in the standings for the wild card. Let's say they're 5 games back or further, I could see them making a move. And it certainly puts a lot of pressure on Hazen to make something happen in 2027, which could make it a little bit more difficult if Hazen's on the hot seat in 2027. I still think it's a situation where both Hazen and Lovullo are tied at the hip. One man's job security is the other man's job security. because I feel like hiring a manager with the possibility of letting the GM go in the subsequent offseason, things don't get better. I don't see that being a thing. I don't think the Diamondbacks should necessarily replace Lovullo with a lame duck manager. So I think it's a situation where if the Diamondbacks aren't successful in 2026, I think you have to consider the possibility of pulling the plug on both Hazen and Lovullo. But if pulling the plug on Hazen isn't in the cards, if a 2026 season happens short of bottoming out, which seems unlikely given the talent on their roster, that would be a scenario where Hazen would be let go. Now, of course, with the payroll situation, you got Burns and his $30 million. You got Lourdes Gurriel Jr. and his $13 million on the IL. Puck's on the IL as well, so add another, $3 million, $4 million to that. The Diamondbacks have a lot of key players that will miss the year. A third of their 2026 payroll will not contribute to the team before the All-Star break. And as I mentioned, that makes it a lot more difficult for the Diamondbacks, who will probably be sitting 175, 180 million for 2026 payroll. Their CBT payroll certainly won't cross the luxury tax number. I don't know if it'll go as high as 220. Kendrick mentioned the possibility of that being lower than the $220 million figure they were projected for in July before they had the deadline sell-off. And with that in mind, there's not a lot of space they have. They're at 205.9 on the luxury tax if you go by roster resource. Cuts is, I think, at 203 million. And then the roster resource payroll has them at 168. So there's not a lot of room. The Diamondbacks probably can make one big free agent addition. I think that has to go to the bullpen. Like I said, Diamondbacks could look at adding a back-end guy who could close and then fall back into a setup role once Martinez comes off the injured list. And obviously there's one player in mind I have that's the top free agent that could fit that possibility as well, because the Diamondbacks have seen him pitch in such a role as an opponent in the postseason. If you look at the Philadelphia Phillies, if Hazen can't handle the bullpen, if it's another year where Hazen can't build a bullpen, can't find a closer situation, because the only 2 years where the closer situation wasn't a mess were 2017 with Fernando Rodney and then 2023 with Paul Sewald. Those are the only 2 years where the Diamondbacks made the playoffs. So he has to handle that closer role. He's got to nail it for this team to have a chance in 2026. And of course, that doesn't seem to be happening via Ketel Marte trade. So a controllable closer candidate probably doesn't seem likely in the trade market. If they don't get it in free agency, then it's just basically rolling the dice and hoping for the best, which is a strategy that hasn't worked over the years. So again, we'll move on to the Ketel Marte trade rumors and how I believe this. We're pretty much at the point where I think the Diamondbacks are getting ready to move on. Like I said, I posted an episode earlier. Look at episode 7 of the podcast. I mentioned that the Diamondbacks should consider the possibility of shutting it down. They're not getting the offers that they're looking for. Hazen basically, I guess you can say, set a deadline, and it's implied to be the new year as the deadline for Ketel Marte offers. And if teams aren't willing to offer a superstar package, which includes a controllable starter and possibly a reliever as well, a reliever or top multiple high-ranking prospects, which is the report from Seattle when the Diamondbacks asked. I don't know if it was something they discussed in the winter meetings or if it was something after the fact, after the winter meetings. And certainly Seattle engaged on Ketel Marte because they're looking for a bat to replace Jorge Polanco. And I'm assuming that's what the Diamondbacks asked for in Marte. That was relayed to the Seattle media from Justin Hollander and Jerry Dipoto. So considering that ask, and if the Diamondbacks don't get the players they want from Marte, they're going to hold on to him, which means they got to shift quickly to try and figure out, okay, where's the closer coming from? Who are they going to target? Is it going to come from free agency, or are they going to swing another trade? And they don't have very many trade chips from both their 40-man roster and their farm system. Maybe they swing a deal. Maybe they swing a deal for Rendell closer. I don't know. Like I said, there's plenty of situations they can go to here, But if they hold on to Ketel Marte, then you have second base accounted for otherwise for the next year and a half. I do think there is DH risk once the Diamondbacks basically commit to holding on to Marte for possibly the next 5 years, because his 10-5 rights kick in April, and at that point, the Diamondbacks can't have basically no leverage when it comes to trading Marte for a maximum return. And in that situation, you have to prepare for the possibility that Marte just decides, okay, I'm just going to be with this club for 5 years, and if Marte is with the Diamondbacks after 2030, there's a non-zero chance he would exercise the player option. You'd be a Diamondback in 2031. I think the only reason he would exercise that option is if he spends 2026 through 2030 with the same team. Otherwise, there's no point you hit the market anyway. I still think in Marte's mind, I think that was set up for him to retire a Diamondback. This is because that option, obviously the option would kick in for his age 37 season. I think that's what he has. And if the Diamondbacks do hold on to Marte and there's fewer clubhouse problems, and he's not irking everybody on the team with random days off, and then if he doesn't get his days off, he kind of sulks, doesn't necessarily swing the bat in certain situations. That could be that's in itself is a problem. I think if the situation they address that issue, we could be looking at 10, 15 years down the road. We talk about a number retirement for Ketel Marte. He would certainly be up there in the discussion for the top position player in franchise history with Paul Goldschmidt, and of course Corbin Carroll's going to eventually catch up in later years as well. And Geraldo Perdomo's best years are in front of him as well. You got Perdomo's best years in front of him, so there's plenty of good candidates on this roster for best Diamondbacks hitter in franchise history, but we're talking about, this is something we should debate in 2035, 10 years from now. So, with the likelihood that Ketel Marte is on the roster of Diamondbacks, we'll have to pivot to other things in their offseason. However, despite these moves, they're going to need some help from their get some breakout from guys already on the club, as a flash breakout potential they need to show it over the course of a year. So, before we get into that, I want to urge you to subscribe. Like I said, the last video, the Bregman video, got us over 300 views, 6 subscribers. We're on a pretty good roll going into 2026. Make sure to get the content here from dbacks Under Review, the podcast, make sure to hit that subscribe button. That is the easiest way to ensure that you'll get your content. Don't wait for YouTube's algorithm to flash it in front of your face. In the browse and recommended sections, you can find it on the subscriptions page, a very easy shortcut on the sidebar when you go to YouTube. Like I said, the dbacks Under Review podcast posts every Monday and Friday at 9 a.m. If you're looking for a time for when to anticipate when these videos come out. We kind of did the premiere thing, kind of dabble with it for a few, but I feel like where we're at audience-wise, we're closing on 50 subscribers and over 100 watch hours on the channel since we started at the end of September in anticipation of covering the Arizona Fall League. Feel like the premiere is probably not necessarily the best leverage for the current audience that this channel has. Anyways, so breakout candidates for 2026. Steve Gilbert for MLB.com, he covers the Diamondbacks for MLB, listed catcher Gabriel Moreno as the Diamondbacks breakout candidate. And of course, Moreno is the clear and obvious choice for potential breakout candidates on this roster because he showed a little bit of power breakout. I wrote about that for Diamondbacks on SI, noted that his ground ball rate had severely dropped and that his pull rate was increasing. So that was something that played out. If you look at his Baseball Savant page, and the thing I love about Baseball Savant is you get to see all the underlying metrics beyond the / WRC plus stuff you see on Fangraphs. The thing we note with Moreno had the lowest ground ball rate of his career, under 40%, which means he's less likely to hit into double plays with men on base. And also, because he's pulling the ball more, his career high in pull rate went from 27.3 to 32.7 in the last year. Career highs in career low in ground ball rate and a career high in pull rate. Well, that actually happened in tandem. He posted his highest career air pull rate, which is sitting at 14.6%. And it's an important bad ball statistic regarding Moreno, because obviously the running joke when Moreno comes up with a man on first base, you have that big hole on the right side of the infield. Hitting a ball between the first and second baseman is often referred to as Gabby Lane. Now, of course, if you've seen Moreno over the years, he's not purely a slap hitter. Although I remember famously watching him in spring training in 2023, it's like, this guy's going to hit 290. And of course, I still stand by that prediction that Moreno will be a career 290 hitter. He's at 281 for his career. He's hit 284 and 285 from a batting average standpoint. Of course, batting average isn't the end-all be-all when it comes to hitters, although we certainly love to use that stat. When you look at Moreno's underlying metrics, his hard hit rate is up, not significantly, but it's up to a career high. His barrel rate is up to 7.1%, as a result of hitting more air contact balls as well. And you got a guy who makes contact at a fairly good rate, doesn't chase, has a whiff rate of 18% on swings, and a chase rate under 26%. So you have a clearly disciplined hitter that also will draw walks. He's above the median in both strikeout rate and walk rate. 17% strikeout rate, 9% walk rate, both pretty solid numbers. And you're getting an improvement in quality of contact. You look at the expected metrics, which is just taking into account his exit velocity and launch angle data. Moreno's expected batting average was 280. His expected slugging was 441. His expected weighted on base average was 343. Now, if you look at the actual numbers, he hit 285 with a 433 slug and a 340 WOBA. So the expected and the actual numbers are pretty close. So there's not a lot of necessarily luck there. But if you look at the trend, obviously the expected metrics are up on Moreno without sacrificing plate discipline or contact ability, which is obviously a good sign and a sign of a power breakout when you consider the massive jump in air pull rate, which means I think we're going to see more slug, more home runs out of Moreno. I think if he's healthy and he gets his 450 plate appearances, we're going to see the home run count jump from 9 to 15 plus. Now, I think he's a guy that if he were to get 600 plate appearances, which is unlikely given that he's a catcher, maybe in a good year he'll get 500. He could be a guy that hits 15 to 20 homers. Maybe he hits over 20 in a year. It could happen even as early as next season if Moreno can stay healthy. Because health has been a big issue. If you look at plate appearances, 380. He started 94 games in 23. Then you look at 2024. He had the groin injury as his big injury that held him out for 6 weeks. Moreno started 78 games in 2024 and 65 games in 2025. Those are the number of starts he made as a catcher. 94, 83, and 66 in starts. He made 6 starts at DH, and I think we're going to see more starts out of him at DH, unless it's a situation where McCann bombs out at 36 and he becomes unplayable. And you look at Moreno, the number of starts he's had behind the plate is trending in the wrong direction. The Diamondbacks would certainly prefer him to be more in this 2023 workload where he started 94 games and completed 93 games behind the plate. Now, I think what we said, based on past precedent, I think the Diamondbacks are budgeting 100 starts for Moreno and 60 starts for McCann at catcher. Of course, that's not going to work out that way, most likely, because Moreno's injury prone and McCann is 36. So they have to budget for the possibility they need a third catcher to get through the season, and I'm not entirely sure who that'll be. Could it be Del Castillo? I don't think so. And so you have to look at their AAA guys. None of their AAA catchers are on the Diamondbacks 40-man roster. So their 40-man roster catchers are Moreno, McCann, and Del Castillo. Del Castillo, to me, is an emergency option that is slightly better than your typical emergency catcher because he's an actual catcher instead of an infielder trying to play catcher. So Moreno is the big bat Diamondbacks need to break out. The guy that needs to break out for them in the rotation is Ryan Nelson. Of course, Nelson had a little bit of a mini breakout at the end of 2025. That's why his ERA dropped down to 3.39. and you look at Nelson's numbers across the board, a career high in strikeout rate at 21%. Diamondbacks certainly want that strikeout rate to continue to climb. I feel like if he can get to 25%, I think he's a frontline starter. He saw more chase with his slider, which has become almost his go-to secondary pitch, especially against right-hand pitching, because Nelson's got such a good four-seam fastball. The pitch produced plus 23 run value, I should say. So certainly among the lines for one of the best fastballs in Major League Baseball in 2023. It's a rare case where Nelson gets that vertical shape without having to cut his fastball. So if you look at Nelson's spin data, Nelson has got 99% active spin on his four-seam fastball, typically to get that 19 inches of induced vertical break and only 3 inches arm side run. So get that 19-3 shape. Nelson does not have to cut his four-seam fastball. However, the downside is Nelson, despite having the great fastball that hasn't really developed a strong secondary pitch, he's gotten better with the breaking stuff. Like I said, the slider is starting to emerge as a possible weapon. When you look at his metrics, if you look at his metrics in 2025, the slider kind of emerged as a swing and miss pitch, a 33.6% whiff rate on the slider, and a 20.6 put away rate on the slider. He's getting more strikeouts on the pitch, which is something Nelson hasn't particularly done well since his 2022 debut. The swing and miss has eluded him. And I feel like if Nelson can develop more slider feel, he's going to get more strikeouts against right-hand pitching, and the way he throws it, I think he can get some swing and miss utility against left-handers when he throws it on the back foot, especially if he uses the cutter. I'm not sure what he's going to do with the curveball, but the curveball is more of a strike-the-ball pitch if he's trying to throw it through the bottom of the strike zone. The one downside to Nelson's arsenal is, despite having 3 glove side pitches between the cutter, the slider, and the curveball, he doesn't really have a useful arm side offering, and I think that might be biomechanically related. Like you said, he has that high arm angle, 53 degrees, very high vertical slot that produces a vertical fastball. Doesn't really protrude well for an arm side offering. He does throw a changeup, but the changeup doesn't really produce results. If you look at the numbers on his changeup, well, he doesn't throw it against righties. The one changeup he threw was a spike pitch to Willie Adames. You look at the other 69, where against lefties he yielded a 300 batting average and a 600 slug, and the expected numbers are equally as bad, but in that small sample size. So Nelson doesn't really have a glove side offering that breaks in that direction. And I feel like that's something that he'll need to figure out if he wants to be a frontline starter, although he can certainly bully the glove side of the plate between the fastball, the cutter, the slider, and the curveball. But with the lack of the glove side offering, I think it's going to make it harder for him. It's going to give him a lesser margin of error when he wants to go to the arm side of the plate with anything other than his four-seam fastball. Now, of course, he could offset that by developing better command. But if hitters don't respect something breaking to Nelson's arm side out of that same tunnel, it does make pitching to there very risky, because then they could just attack the tunnel if they read spin and they see a ball to strike tunnel with the slider or the curveball or the cutter. Of course, Nelson probably isn't going to throw a cutter to the arm side of the plate. I don't know what the solution is. Does he throw a sinker, which is going to be particularly difficult for him? Or does he finally figure out something for that changeup? But for me, Nelson is the big arm to watch. You could also look at Brandon Pfaadt as a possibility, and Pfaadt can be more than just a bad innings eater, which he was in 2025, despite an ERA north of 5. He gave the Diamondbacks over 170 innings. Brandon Pfaadt, I think, is the linchpin to the Diamondbacks rotation, because I expect Nelson to have a pretty good 2026 season. He's in the right trajectory. For Pfaadt, it's been hit or miss. He had a bad 2023 season. He saw improvement in 2024 despite an ugly ERA. He pitched better than the 4.71 ERA, but then when you look at 2025, he took another step backwards, and I feel like it was a case where Brandon Pfaadt was either serviceable, like the quality starts numbers weren't too bad. I think he had 15 quality starts in 2026, but when he didn't throw a quality start, I am having a tough time speaking. When he didn't throw a quality start, it was bad news. It was the Diamondbacks were in danger of getting blown out type game. In regards to Fott. And of course, the thing I love about Baseball Reference is you can look up the advanced stats on a pitcher. For starting pitching, get quality starts. So if you look at Brandon Fott's 2025 season, 33 starts, and of course, Fott has been durable. Like, that is literally the best thing you can say about Brandon Fott's career. He has not missed a start because of an injury. At any level. Since signing with the Diamondbacks in 2020. And you look at his numbers, he won 13 games, and he had 12 quality starts. And if we look at the numbers, Fott had 5 cheap wins and 1 tough loss. So when Fott threw a quality start, the Diamondbacks basically won. And of course, if you look at the 2025 season as a whole, the Diamondbacks typically won better than the average team when they got a quality start. I think their record was, their winning percentage was like 770 when they got a quality start from their rotation. And they got a lot of quality starts out of the rotation, believe it or not. If you look at the club. I think they were top 10 in quality starts. Diamondbacks were, but the problem was when they didn't get a quality start, they got destroyed. And that's kind of the problem. The Diamondbacks, in theory, were built to live and die with their rotation, which they would have been happy with to start the season, but the problem is they died when their rotation did not deliver. So the Diamondbacks did deliver 68 quality starts in the 2025 season. And at 42%, I believe that should be top 10. But anyways, Brandon Fott is the linchpin. I think the team will go where Brandon Fott goes. If Brandon Fott has a good year, the Diamondbacks, I think, will be in the playoffs. If he doesn't have a good year, well, Hazen made another bad judgment on pitching and committing money. And you have the Eduardo Rodriguez problem and you have the Brandon Fott problem. That's $125 million guaranteed money into 2 pitchers that are not helping you win. So you look at Fott. That Fott's I think a guy, if he throws more cutters in 2026, should help with the contact suppression thing, and better breaking ball execution, I think, will also help in that regard. So Brandon Fott is going to have to step up in 2026. No ifs, ands, or buts. They paid him a lot of money. It's time for him to earn that contract. And you look at the bullpen, my 4th and final breakout candidate is going to be Brandon Garcia. Of course, there's nothing really from Garcia's metrics that would indicate a potential breakout, but we're also talking about a guy that's already got his first taste of the major league. Ironically enough, he is still a prospect, even though I feel like he's got plenty of experience as a major league pitcher. And you look at Garcia. Garcia is probably the only pitcher in the Diamondbacks bullpen that can hit 97 and throw strikes. And you can hear the exasperation in the second half of that statement. A reliever that throws 97 with a killer breaking ball. The Diamondbacks had that at the start of the season. Unfortunately, he only made 8 appearances before his arm fell off. We saw what Diamondbacks... And one thing that wasn't talked about much when the Diamondbacks' second half surge in 2024 was how A.J. Puck was such a huge part of that bullpen, because that gave the Diamondbacks a guy that brings like, you aren't scoring. In fact, I'm going to strike out half your lineup. That's why A.J. Puck provided the Diamondbacks bullpen before his arm fell off. And I think Garcia is kind of in that situation. He doesn't have the same four-seam fastball as Puck. Garcia is more of an east-west pitcher, where you have the arm side sinkers, with not a lot of vertical break, which isn't necessarily bad because you want the pitch to sink. And then coming with sweepers the other way. And I've seen quite a few at-bats where left-handers just could not pick up the sweeper. And the slider, more of the... And his third pitch is a gyro slider, which kind of sits halfway in between his sinker and his sweeper, which have a lot of horizontal break. I don't know how many pitchers in the league throw 99 with 18 inches of arm side run. Brandon Garcia is one of them. And you know how I got that number? Diamondbacks showed it when he struck out while he was dealing with Matt Chapman against the Giants. I actually went to that game. Garcia was absolutely filthy that day. Struck out Adames and Chapman with a runner at third. So he does have some swing and miss viability, even though it doesn't show up necessarily in the metrics. I think it's a situation where getting more comfortable facing more hitters. I think you're, again, a guy with a lot of strike the ball capability because he gets a lot of late movement working to the east-west edges of the strike zone. I think he's a guy if he works those edges. Those for two particular edges. So we look at the horizontal lines that the strike zone. I think we're looking at someone who could really make a difference. And of course, the slider again serves as a third pitch that punishes hitters for expecting a lot of horizontal movement because the slider is in that gyro 0-0 shape. It leans a little towards glove's side. But he does have 3 distinct offerings that he can throw on a given count, which a hitter can't tee off on. And I think for Garcia, he's a guy I think who's going to not only step up and to become the Diamondbacks' high leverage lefty before puck comes off the IL. I think he's going to be a key member of the bullpen for the years to come. And speaking of the bullpen, obviously, we look at the Diamondbacks' top remaining needs in the offseason. Of course, the Diamondbacks need to get that, I guess you can say, someone who could serve as the interim closer in a situation while they wait for Puck and Martinez to come off the IL. And of course, if you look at Diamondbacks' closer situation 2025, I like what they did to start this season, where you match up Puck and Martinez against certain parts of the lineup. And I feel like that was a pretty good idea because then you would have AJ Puck's exposure against right-handed hitters a little less when you consider his stuff is much more, I guess you can say, lefty killer. Whereas you look at Justin Martinez, his fastball, he throws two different, Martinez who throws 2 different fastballs in a splitter. I don't think he's necessarily as platoon vulnerable as Puck is. That was a situation where you look at it, it's like, okay, they have a pretty good situation working, but unfortunately that worked for all of like 12 games. 19 games. They were 12-7 to start the year, and then they just didn't have AJ Puck no more. I think they would have been okay holding on to if Martinez doesn't get hurt twice. He had the dead arm phase around the same time that Puck went down, and then after coming back, blew out his elbow in June. That was a pretty gut-wrenching game itself. I know it obviously ended with the Josh Naylor slam that walked things off, but I feel like that was one of those Pirate victory games where it's like, oh, well, that sucks. And Shelby Miller did a pretty good job of filling in the closer role through the trade deadline, but then once Miller went hurt, it's like, okay, the Diamondbacks really don't have a useful back-end guy, and that really hurt them in July. Even though I feel like their offense kind of went cold, also did them in as well. The Diamondbacks had trouble scoring for about 2 weeks as they were losing games. It was a situation where kind of just like the team fell apart, nothing was working, and they went from soft buyers to hard sellers at the trade deadline. And the Diamondbacks bullpen going into 2026 doesn't look much better. Like I said, the situation isn't much different than what they ended 2025 with. They haven't really made any signings yet. They brought back Curtis as a... John Curtis was ended the season in the Diamondbacks 2025 bullpen. He's certainly a guy that will compete for a spot in spring training, but I don't necessarily think he's a guy they should open the season with. As a minor league depth guy, that's certainly not a bad option. However, they do need to find their closer candidate. As I've been rambling on about that too much. The top free agent remaining, and I mentioned that in the last video, was Sir Anthony Dominguez. Dominguez is projected to get $18 to $20 million on the open market. And if Diamondbacks did sign him, he does have experience pitching high leverage innings in the postseason. Not necessarily the 9th inning, because when the Diamondbacks faced the Phillies in the 2023 NLCS, their closer was Craig Kimbrell, although Kimbrell's highlight act for the Diamondbacks, and I would argue Kimbrell was the Diamondbacks' number 2 MVP behind Ketel Marte in that series. You had the walk-off hit to Marte, obviously the snakes alive moment, and then he served up the Thomas home run. That, which would arguably be the biggest hit in Diamondbacks history, outside that 2001 season. So Dominguez obviously did have some experience closing with the Phillies. I think when he started out with them in 2018 is when he had the most looks at closer. We'll look it up real quick. So Dominguez does have closer experience, although it isn't fairly recent. He has 40 career saves, so it's not a question of if he's done it before. So looking at his track record, he had 16 saves his rookie year on a bad Phillies team in 2018. 11 saves in 2024, 10 of them coming with the Orioles. So he does have closer experience. If the Diamondbacks wanted to make a move in free agency, Dominguez is the guy they want to bring in. Because if they other than Dominguez, there isn't a lot of options left. Like I said, the top remaining free agent on the Fangraphs free agent tracker is Justin Wilson, although he's projected for 0.5 WAR and is not really a closer. And you look further down the list, not really any late inning types other than Dominguez. I know Diamondbacks were tied to Pierce Johnson, but Johnson isn't a 9th inning guy. He's a 7th inning guy. Evan Phillips is another guy on the market that does have closer experience. They could look at Scott Barlow, although Barlow hasn't been a strong contender in a while. Same with Rafael Montero. That'd be the classic Hazen trying to rely on an aging over-the-hill closer, which hasn't worked for the Diamondbacks under his tenure, and that's why they've struggled to make the postseason. So if you want to get some surety out of the free agent market, it's pretty much Dominguez or bust. The rest of them are either setup men or middle relievers. Of course, we look at setup man, obviously Danny Coulomb, I would put in the subcategory, Tyler Kinley as well, Justin Wilson. Those are pretty much what you have there. The rest are middle inning guys. The Diamondbacks probably should avoid, because for a team like Diamondbacks, your middle inning guys need to be guys that are cracking the major league bullpen lineup. You get prospect guys that are getting their first look in there. And they certainly have those guys in their bullpen. You look at Juan Murillo as one, Philip Abner. Those are certainly guys the Diamondbacks could use. And when you have a tight payroll, you probably don't want your middle innings guys getting $5-6 million. You're going to probably fill those guys with near league minimum players to try and hope that they find some consistency, or at least enough consistency that they don't hurt the team. And then going beyond the bullpen, obviously, if we're Dominguez a bust for a closer, we're probably looking at the trade market otherwise. And I think if they were to dangle McCarthy or Thomas in the trade market, you're most likely getting 1 year rental closer as your best return. If you're talking about a pitcher that moves the needle forward for the Diamondbacks, a rental closer is basically the best you're going to get for McCarthy or Thomas. And there's certainly not a lot of teams that are looking for a guy you're not sure is replacement level, or a 2-WAR player in McCarthy, or a guy who was possibly an average starting center fielder but hasn't hit at the major league level in Alek Thomas, and his defense has gotten worse with each passing year. So I don't know how much viable Thomas is as a player unless he has a major breakout, but if that happens, obviously, the Diamondbacks aren't going to trade him. And maybe they continue the sunk cost fallacy with Thomas. I could be wrong. So it feels like, again, Dominguez on the free agent market, or they're going to have to get a Band-Aid option closer through the trade market by dangling Thomas or McCarthy. But regardless of the bullpen situation, Diamondbacks also have to figure out their first base situation as well. I assume Jordan Lawler will get a look at third base if they don't do much there. I think between Lawler and Alexander, they can figure out third base. First base is a big one to figure out. Is Pavin Smith and Del Castillo going to be in the lineup? Because if you have Pavin Smith at first base, I think you're going to see them pick up a right-hand platoon bat. And of course, everyone's favorite option for that would be Paul Goldschmidt. And I do think if the Diamondbacks do need a short side platoon bat to play first base DH, Goldschmidt is your best option. Assuming Goldschmidt wouldn't mind coming back to Arizona for $5 million, per se. And I say $5 million because we're doing Longoria plus inflation. I think we're looking at $5-6 million for Goldschmidt, because the Diamondbacks really can't pay a lot of money for a short side platoon bat. And those guys typically don't get a lot of money if they don't play a premium position. Of course, they could also consider Austin Hayes as an outfield option to try and upgrade their lineup against right-hand pitching, although it doesn't certainly help their first base situation. So we look at Goldschmidt as the Diamondbacks' possible outcome at first base. They did pick up Luken Baker on a minor league deal. Baker is a guy who's been blocked, ironically, by Goldschmidt in St. Louis. So they could look at him. Hoskins is also an option if they wanted to roll the dice on a potential bounce back, although the Brewers did the same and didn't get their money's worth out of that as well. Or they go to Ty France, although France hasn't shown significant platoon splits. He doesn't necessarily kill left-hand pitching. If he did, I think he would be the perfect choice. So again, I feel like Paul Goldschmidt's the Diamondbacks' best option at first base. They could look at Donovan Solano if they wanted to go strictly platoon bat. Wilmer Flores, although Flores had a pretty weak year with the Giants in 2025. But again, if the Diamondbacks want a proven lefty killer, Goldschmidt is their best choice. They want an everyday first baseman. I think they roll the dice on Rhys Hoskins. Although I don't know how much you can trust a 33-year-old player who has a major injury and then hasn't been particularly good the last 2 years. You look at Hoskins last year. Didn't put up okay numbers, but fell out of line when the Brewers picked up Andrew Vaughn and resurrected his career after they got him from Chicago. Although, like I said, the metrics on Hoskins are not great, but if they wanted to roll the dice on him, again, 0.9 F-WAR and 90 games, if he can stay healthy, maybe you look at a possible two-war situation. You would platoon the DH role between Pavin Smith and Blaze Alexander. Like I said, I think it's much more likely to go with a Smith-Goldie platoon at first base. I don't like their current internal options, even though Tawa and Vargas give you more versatility defensively. They can play second base as well. Both of them can. And Vargas can also play third. Tawa can play the outfield. I just don't see it in that situation. If they're going to go with a platoon bat, it's better to bring in Goldschmidt. So you're looking at bullpen. Maybe they get some outfield help if they can get there. Like I said, they have to replace Gurriel in the lineup. Austin Hayes has a lot of... I would say Austin Hayes has a lot of action on. There's a lot of teams that checked in on him. Although he's certainly a candidate for a one-year deal. Hayes is probably a one-year deal the rest of the way, but Diamondbacks could put Hazen in left field and accept the fact that he's probably not going to do well against righties. You lower him in the lineup against righties, you lift him up against lefties. He'd be an option for left field for a given year while the Diamondbacks wait for Gurriel finishes ACL rehab. When we say ACL, this time we're talking about the ligament, not necessarily the complex league. That's what the Diamondbacks could do. There's not a lot of options left in the open market. Like I said, all the needle-moving free agents are more or less gone, other than the starting pitching market, which is starting to pick up. Maybe we'll talk about Zach Gallen when there's more news on him. I assume the starting pitching market's going to pick up soon, with Imai going to the Houston Astros and Framber Valdez likely to sign soon. But that's pretty much all I have to say on that, on what the Diamondbacks have for this offseason. Again, we're going more than 40 minutes and a lot longer than I anticipated. But anyways, if you made it this far in, thank you for watching. Like I said, probably the longest episode we've done on this not Snakes on Diamond. That's my old podcast. My current podcast is the D-Backs on Review podcast. So if you enjoyed the content, leave a like, give a comment down below who you think the Diamondbacks breakout candidates should be between Ryan Nelson, Brandon Pfaadt, Gabriel Moreno, and Brandon Garcia. And again, if you want to check out my newsletter, although it's been a while since I've written something on there, you can go to dbacks.underreview.com. That's my newsletter on Substack on the Arizona Diamondbacks. It's where I go, where I put my analysis that isn't necessarily aggregation safe on Heavy. If you want to check out my content there, DiamondbacksContentHeavy.com. You can follow me on Twitter at MikeMcD8393 and the D-Backs Under Review account at DBacks Review.